This video contains flashing lights and colors.
Disney is one of those companies you either hate, love to hate, or hate to love. Regardless of how you feel though, there's no denying how influential they are in the theme park industry. For decades, Disney has delivered some of the most innovative and iconic theme park attractions of all time. Though for every Big Thunder Mountain and Pirates of the Caribbean, there are a fair share of duds in their history. Admittedly, rides like Superstar Limo, Rocket Rods, and Journey into Your Imagination are pretty much low-hanging fruit at this point. But what about the attractions that are not only bad, but rarely discussed? Now obviously, if literally nobody heard about these rides, they would be in another dimension. But by rides you've never heard of, I mean the rides that are easy to forget, not discussed that often, or the ones that Disney wants you to forget. With that said, keep your arms and legs inside the vehicle because we're going to attempt to rank the 10 worst Disney rides that most likely you've never heard of. And stick around for the end for an attraction that's not a ride, but may be the most controversial and potentially offensive addition ever installed at a Disney park. Before we kick off the top 10 though, a quick honorable mention. Toy Soldier's parachute drop at France's Walt Disney Studios Park and Hong Kong Disneyland. You may remember those old classic parachute tower rides, such as the one that was recently demolished at New Jersey's Six Flags Great Adventure. At one point, this ride was pretty much a mainstay at Six Flags parks, and the concept dated all the way back to 1939. Well, in 2010, a smaller attraction of this variety opened in both France and Hong Kong, each one operating in their respective parks' Toy Story areas. When I first started making this video, I planned on discussing how the ride feels anticlimactic due to the relatively gentle speed of the descent. This is a controlled cable drop, so it's much less intense than a drop that purely runs on gravity, or something like the Tower of Terror that pulls you down faster than gravity. That said, while I was writing this script, I started to reconsider labeling this ride as bad, even if some would agree. In general, parachute tower rides aren't necessarily meant to be thrill rides, aside from the heights. Rather, they're meant to be family-friendly attractions to give guests a good view of the surrounding area. To its target audience of young children, it could very well be a gateway into experiencing more intense drop rides. Really, the worst part about this ride, from what I've heard, are the wait times. It's a pretty low-capacity experience. Many argue that this short, mild ride is often not worth the waits it gets. That said, this ride does look pretty cool, and it does have its fans. One YouTube user recreated it in the game Minecraft. Now that's what I call dedication. For this list, I'm gonna give this ride a pass, but I'll still discuss it here so I could include it in the thumbnail. Number 10, Avengers Assemble Flight Force at Walt Disney Studios Park. This is considered by many to be one of the worst re-themes of all time. Originally, this was a clone of Rock and Roller Coaster at Disney's Hollywood Studios in Florida. It had the exact same layout and thematic elements as well. In 2019 though, the ride closed for a major refurbishment. When it reopened in 2022 as part of the new Avengers campus area, expectations were high. The same year, Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind debuted, and many thought it was awesome. Some hoped for a similar experience. Instead, guests got a half-assed retheme that reeked of budget cuts and corporate synergy. The retheme saw guests joining a mission involving Iron Man and Captain Marvel. Basically, you have to stop a barrage of alien missiles before they hit Earth. To be honest, this story sounds like something an AI chatbot would come up with. A 5-year-old could probably come up with something better. Now to be fair, there is an excellent animatronic figure of Iron Man in the queue, which many say is the only good thing that was added to the attraction. Once you hop on board and the train launches, you are in near darkness for most of the ride. There are a few projections of Iron Man and Captain Marvel, as well as some assorted lighting effects panels, but there was very little set design. And as for the so-called story, most writers could hardly register it. All you can see is assorted lights and projections zoom by and you can barely even tell what's happening. In all honesty, the story could be about Iron Man trying to find a bathroom and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. The onboard audio is also a major downgrade for many guests. The original rock soundtrack gave the ride true personality. Who doesn't love going on a roller coaster with rockin' tunes in the background? Flight Force, on the other hand, uses a more generic Marvel-style soundtrack, similar to what you can find on a stock audio website. This music is bland, forgettable, and mediocre, but it's still better than Maroon 5. Oh, and there's also dialogue, but it's practically impossible to understand over the coaster's noise. Another criticism is the overall setting. Avengers Campus in Paris has often been described as sterile and industrial looking. The whole place just feels boring, and it lacks the layered detail that people expect from Disney. The whole zone and this ride feel more like you're inside of an insurance commercial than a Marvel movie. Now, to be fair, the coaster itself is said to be very fun, with a thrilling launch, 3 inversions, and an increased intensity due to the darkness. This ride is fine for a Six Flags park, but this is Disney and people expected a lot more. It's far from the worst ride ever, but it's definitely one of the most forgettable modern re-themes. Not a bad ride, but a bad Disney ride. And that's why this coaster takes the number 10 spot. Number 9. Wandering Oaken Sliding Sleighs at Hong Kong Disneyland. Now, on the surface, you may look at this coaster and think, how could this be a bad ride? It looks beautiful. Well, it's true that the landscaping and theming around the track are absolutely stunning. Reviewers, however, certainly have a bone to pick with this attraction. Now, just to compare, let's look at the Magic Kingdom's Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. This ride has gorgeous theming, but it also has a decent length. After a breezy series of bank turns, you enter the Dwarf's Diamond Mine, where you get to see some charming animatronics and dazzling lights, as well as hearing the Hi-Ho song. Then you get to the more exciting part of the ride, with more drops and bank turns. By the end, you reach the Dwarf's Cottage, where you see them dancing with Snow White. You even get to see the evil queen in her peddler's disguise. You are literally transported inside of the story on this ride, and while it may not be that intense, it's absolutely perfect for the whole family, provided you reach the height minimum. Wandering Oaken Sliding Sleighs, on the other hand, simply cannot compare. Immediately after leaving the station, you see Olaf on your right using a dangling carrot to get Sven to walk along a treadmill to power the lift hill. The animatronic here is so simple that it might as well just be a moving statue. Even worse, this is the only time you'll see any characters from Frozen on this ride. After ascending the lift hill and dropping into the layout, you seem to get a decent coaster experience through the landscape. This is much like on Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, but instead of encountering any more scenes from the movie or recognizable characters, the whole thing ends in less than a minute. You spend 9 seconds exiting the station, 15 seconds ascending the lift hill, and 24 seconds of main ride time before hitting the final brake run. Yes, the main criticism of this ride is that it feels incredibly rushed and extremely short. It's as if they built it so that it would look good in promotional photos rather than providing a ride with any kind of depth, story, or unique mechanics. The ride cars didn't even swing like on Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. This is just a standard family coaster you'd see at a park like SeaWorld. This could have been so much better if they simply included more animatronics and references to the movies. As it stands though, many argue that this is one of Disney's weakest attractions despite the coaster itself being smooth and mildly enjoyable. To give an idea of what the general consensus of this ride is, here's the top comment from a POV video of the attraction. Corey the Raven says, "OMG, imagine waiting 2 hours in line, you get strapped in, the coaster takes off, and you blink. Damn." Yep, it's pretty much a blink and you'll miss it kind of ride. Number 8. Raging Spirits at Tokyo Disney Sea. I know what you might be thinking. How dare you put Tokyo Disney Sea on this list? It's one of the greatest theme parks on Earth, and indeed, that's true. This park is stunningly beautiful, and it has plenty of incredible attractions. But that doesn't mean every attraction there is perfect. In fact, their top roller coaster is a pretty big bust. Now, to be fair, the theming is absolutely gorgeous, as it is for the rest of the park. Stone statues, waterfalls, greenery, fire, the works. The theming is so expansive that this ride is actually one of the most expensive roller coasters ever built, costing a reported $74 million. That's more money than the cost of Orion at Kings Island and Fury 325 at Carowinds combined. Indeed, the visuals are stellar, but the ride itself, not so much. You see, although this coaster was built by acclaimed Swiss manufacturer Intamin, it was based on a ride that isn't exactly loved. Raging Spirits is, in fact, an almost exact clone of the TL59 model by defunct Italian manufacturer Pinfari. This was actually Pinfari's first coaster to have a loop. Only 3 of these models were said to be built, and only 2 are still operational: Bulldog Coaster at England's Breen theme park and looping at Iraq's Family Fun. This compact coaster model was meant for traveling fairs, not for major Disney parks. Like most of Pinfari's coasters, Raging Spirits is often criticized for its extremely rough ride experience. Many point out that the over-the-shoulder restraints result in some truly uncomfortable headbanging and that it just isn't a fun experience. The pacing is also lambasted, with the mid-course brake run effectively bringing whatever thrills there are to a halt. For those of you who are unfamiliar, a block zone is a section of ride that, damn it, for many, Raging Spirits looks nice, but it's a below-average coaster, and if it weren't for the impressive theming, it would be unredeemable. You could say the Oriental Land Company really dropped the ball with this edition. Number 7. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Peril at Disneyland Paris. This right here is the exact same coaster as Raging Spirits with all of the same issues, though it was introduced first. Originally, Disney officials had plans for an entire Indiana Jones-themed area for their Paris park, but Disneyland Paris, then known as Euro Disneyland, was a financial failure out of the gate. Its initial attendance and revenue were such big disappointments that the company ended up canceling and scaling back many projects. What was supposed to be a full-fledged Indiana Jones-themed zone became a single crappy roller coaster. But if this coaster is the same as Raging Spirits, what made it worse? Well, admittedly, it also had some pretty impressive theming, with a mock temple at the center. Though when it first opened, the authentic rockwork was made with foam instead. Also, there was a stretch of time between 2000 and 2004 where the ride was even worse than it is today. And what's worse than riding a rough, uncomfortable roller coaster? How about riding a rough, uncomfortable roller coaster backwards? Yes, in an attempt to increase attendance and interest in the ride, Disneyland Paris flipped the cars around so that guests would navigate the layout facing in the opposite direction. Unfortunately, this ended up being hugely painful. Without a clear view of the track ahead, passengers were unable to brace themselves for the turns and dips. This meant that the coaster was even more uncomfortable than it already was. Due to negative feedback, the backwards feature was removed from the ride in 2004, and it's operated as a standard roller coaster ever since. The backwards version alone is well deserving of this spot on the list, but we're not even halfway through it. Number 6. Mulholland Madness at Disney's California Adventure. God, I feel like I can't escape Wild Mouse coasters on this channel. I must have talked about them like 10 times over the past few months. Well, if you're new to the channel, Wild Mouse coasters are known for their compact layouts, sudden hairpin turns, and dips. Disney actually dabbled with them a couple of times. There was the famous spinning Wild Mouse Primeval Whirl at Disney's Animal Kingdom, and a standard Wild Mouse in California. Nowadays, this attraction is known as Goofy's Sky School, which I often forget even exists at California Adventure. The ride isn't exactly great or memorable. In fact, this is the lowest rated coaster at any Disney theme park on Earth according to Captain Coaster. But why would Disney put something as commonplace as a Wild Mouse at what's supposed to be a world-class theme park? Let's rewind a bit back to the days where Michael Eisner ran the company. When Disney's California Adventure first opened, it kinda sucked. The idea was not to focus on Disney IPs, but rather the state of California itself. Former CEO Michael Eisner figured that tourists only wanted to stop by Disneyland and spend the rest of their vacation visiting the state's other famous locations. To encourage these tourists to stay longer, it was decided to theme the park to California itself. Various parts of the state were represented through the attractions and landscapes. But aside from a handful of well-received rides like Grizzly River Rapids and Soarin' Over California, many of the rides just felt cheap and out of place in a Disney park. Of course, initial examples include the aforementioned Superstar Limo, but another attraction that doesn't get much attention is Mulholland Madness. Before it was re-themed, it was themed to the famous Mulholland Drive in Los Angeles. The ride's story, if you can even call it that, centered on guests renting a car and going on a joyride on the famous street. The theming, if you can even call it that, was incredibly sparse. There were some caution patterns, some random kid doing the Home Alone face, a donuts billboard, and billboards that looked like those carpets us millennials used to have as a kid. The theming felt even cheaper than Superstar Limo, and even today, the coaster is criticized for being very rough and incredibly uncomfortable. At least Primeval Whirl had a more colorful and memorable appearance, and at least the car spun to give it more variety. Mulholland Madness, though, was simply a generic coaster that had no place at a Disney park. In 2010, Mulholland Madness closed for a refurbishment, and the next year, it was rethemed to Goofy's Sky School. The theming, while better than before, is still pretty sparse. Still though, this Wild Mouse is better than Coast Rider at the nearby Knott's Berry Farm, so there's at least that. Plus, it's themed to Goofy nowadays, and anything with Goofy is automatically 10 times better. What a badass. Number 5. Ant-Man and the Wasp Nano Battle at Hong Kong Disneyland. Originally, this ride was known as Buzz Lightyear's Astro Blasters and was largely the same experience as the one that currently exists at other Disney parks. In this classic attraction, guests shoot at targets from rotating ride vehicles, racking up points as they go face-to-face with the evil Emperor Zurg and his minions. Many consider the ride to be an overload of nostalgia, but in 2017, the version in Hong Kong closed for good. This was in preparation for the new Stark Expo-themed area, once again based on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Initially, there was intrigue. Before Ant-Man completely jumped the shark by introducing Mr. Electric from Shark Boy and Lava Girl, people were genuinely interested in the series. So a ride based on it sounded like a great time, but what guests ended up getting was about the same experience as watching Quantumania. First of all, just look at this new exterior. This looks more like a bank than the entrance to an exciting dark ride. At least you get money at banks. This ride feels like it robs you. Instead of outer space, this ride takes place at the SHIELD Science and Technology Pavilion at Tony Stark's Expo. But the venue is under attack by an army of swarm bots who are trying to steal something known as the Data Core that is stored by SHIELD in the pavilion. Once again, it sounds like AI came up with the plot and a 5-year-old would do better. At the start of the ride, you board your gray dystopian ride vehicles. Honestly, it looks like you're about to be transported to a galactic prison instead of going on an exciting dark ride. Once the ride starts, you immediately see the downgrade. Gone was the color and charm of the original attraction, and in its place is a bland, boring dark ride with tons of screens and dull industrial visuals. There aren't even any animatronics. There are moving set pieces, sure, but would it have killed them to have animatronics of Ant-Man or the Wasp? It's like a generic sci-fi movie just threw up all over the original attraction, and Disney looked at the puke and said, "Looks okay to us." These visuals are so bland and soulless, it makes you long for the days of creepy celebrity animatronics on Superstar Limo. Ant-Man can shrink. Why couldn't they take a page out of the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids playground and had some giant everyday objects? Imagine being in a backyard or someone's living room. That would have been awesome. Now, I'm not sure if this ride has its fans or not, but as it stands, this is one of the worst makeovers ever to befall a Disney attraction. But at least there's some kind of interactivity to it. The same can't be said for number 4, Cars Road Trip at Walt Disney Studios Park. Remember the old studio backlot tour at Disney's Hollywood Studios, back when it was Disney MGM Studios? Remember boarding that long tram and taking a leisurely cruise past the Earful Tower, through the Costume and Materials Building, and also viewing vehicles and props used in several famous movies? Perhaps the most memorable portion of the ride was Catastrophe Canyon, a rocky area with a fuel tanker. Here, guests accidentally, in quotes, arrived during the middle of filming, and a flood of water cascaded down the set right towards them. There were also thrilling fire effects, as well as an earthquake effect too. As a kid, this was just awesome. Well, eventually, Disney Imagineers wanted to add a similar attraction to the Walt Disney Studios Park in France. This result was not nearly as good. But how do you improve a watered-down version of a classic? By slapping an IP on it. Except they didn't improve it. Yes, in 2020, this attraction closed for a major refurbishment. And in 2021, Cars Road Trip opened. This was also a tram tour, but instead of being themed to Hollywood, it was themed to a roadside attraction tour on Route 66, the main road from the Cars franchise. The best way I can describe this ride is that it's like a Krabby Land-style disaster. Remember when Mr. Krabs slapped a playground together with a bunch of discarded junk in a cheap way to cater to young audiences? Well, the same was pretty much done here. There is hardly any Cars theming on this ride, and the characters are pretty much just statues that only move their eyes. And just look at these so-called roadside attractions. The world's largest lug nut, the world's largest road map. These are just lame, oversized statues plopped next to the pathway. There's even a stretch of ride where you just go by a bunch of trees. If I wanted to look at trees, I'd go to the Superior Heritage Gardens in Sandwich, Massachusetts, or just watch the happening. Sure, you do get some video commentary by Cruz Ramirez and Sally, but it really doesn't add anything to the ride experience. Eventually, after a long, tedious ride, you reach Catastrophe Canyon, now renamed Cars-tastrophe Canyon. That pun physically made my soul feel empty. Here, the tanker is repainted to resemble an anthropomorphic Dynaco oil tanker, which is the oil company featured in several Pixar films. You then see the same water and fire effects as before, but now that the truck is alive, I guess his ass is on fire. Apparently, this scene is referred to as a natural car wash, and the tanker is simply taking a shower to clean himself. Yes, because whenever I take a shower, I make sure to light my ass on fire. To put it bluntly, this was a lazy attempt at slapping an IP on an already mediocre attraction. And speaking of which, number 3, motorboat cruise to Gummi Glen at Disneyland. Now I'm not gonna lie, I don't have a whole lot to say about this one. First of all, footage of this attraction is extremely rare. I wasn't able to reach out to half of the people who uploaded footage of it, and the other half made their videos private, so unfortunately I have no way of accessing that footage. Plus, I could really only find unofficial images, probably because Disney was so embarrassed by the attraction. All of these images are copyrighted, so with that said, this segment will be short, but I will give a brief summary. Back in 1957, an attraction opened called the Motorboat Cruise. Located on the border of Fantasyland and Tomorrowland, passengers would pilot their own miniature motorboats through the waterways. Eventually, though, this area of the park got a temporary makeover as part of an event called Disney Afternoon Avenue, based on the Disney Afternoon cartoon block. This introduced several new meet and greet opportunities with characters from the block shows: Rescue Rangers, DuckTales, Darkwing Duck, Tailspin, etc. It also saw some of the attractions re-themed. Autopia was themed to Rescue Rangers Raceway, and in a more laughable example, the Motorboat Cruise was themed to the Gummy Bears. To envision what this ride was like, all you have to do is take promotional images of the original Motorboat Cruise and plaster PNGs of Gummy Bears characters onto them. In the case of Disneyland, the PNGs were made out of plywood, but there's essentially no difference between this visual and what you'd actually get on the ride. You would just pass by a bunch of scenes of the gummy bears making gummy berry juice. They didn't move, and they were flat as hell. Another Krabby Land-style disaster. Apologies for the lack of media for this segment, but copyright on YouTube is hella dicey, and I'd rather not risk it. I'll link all the images I can find of it in the description. Number 2, Luigi's Flying Tires at Disney's California Adventure. I discussed this ride over a year ago in a previous video, but even still, it's a relatively obscure attraction that people often forget about, so I simply have to include it in this video. Now, back in 1961, Disneyland debuted the Flying Saucers. Is it debuted or debuted? I never can tell. This was a Tomorrowland attraction that used a complex air cushion system to make vehicles float across the floor. It was like some kind of giant air hockey table, and it was pretty ambitious and innovative too. However, it was also monstrously unreliable. This was because the computers were not advanced enough to manage the airflow. Plus, the ride had constant downtime, and it was expensive to operate. It closed after only a few years, but still, fans remembered it fondly. It even made an appearance in the Roller Coaster Tycoon series. Decades later, as part of the massive overhaul of Disney's California Adventure and the construction of Cars Land, the company decided to revisit the concept. In addition to the acclaimed Radiator Springs Racers, there was Luigi's Flying Tires. Instead of futuristic saucers, guests would board giant hovering tires inside Luigi's Casa della Tire shop. The concept was simple: shift your weight to steer and bump into other riders, much like the original. It sounded like a perfect blast to the past and a nice little addition to Radiator Springs. Well, at least it sounded good on paper. In practice, it was about as exciting as watching paint dry at the DMV. During early previews, Disney CEO Bob Iger reportedly found the ride to be underwhelming and asked if it could go faster. Embarrassed Imagineers then had to admit that it was already operating at its limit. Unlike the original Flying Saucers, this version did not use individual floor valves to control airflow. Instead, air was just constantly flowing beneath the entire floor, and that made it pretty hard to build up pressure and generate speed for the tires. The vehicles were also larger to improve capacity, with each tire able to hold 2 adults. This added bulk made them heavier and harder to move. The result was a ride that felt sluggish, awkward, and just plain stupid. Many guests struggled to control the vehicles due to the surprisingly steep learning curve. Most tourists were simply not interested in having to practice a Disney ride just to avoid drifting aimlessly. Meanwhile, others found boarding and exiting tricky because the vehicles were bulky and easy to trip over. Minor injuries and complaints followed. To try and inject some energy into this attraction, Disney actually added giant Italian flag-colored beach balls into the mix. Guests were encouraged to toss them around while riding, but this feature came with its own problems. Thousands of these oversized beach balls had to be inflated daily, and some guests reported minor injuries as a result with being hit by them. To guests and employees, these balls kind of sucked. What did they suck? Take a wild guess. Eventually, the balls were removed, and this effectively neutered the ride experience, taking away the one thing meant to arouse excitement in the attraction. Cars Land itself was a massive success, anchored by Radiator Springs racers, but Luigi's Flying Tires consistently ranked low in guest surveys. This ride was just boring, and sometimes being boring is worse than just being bad. After less than 3 years of operation, this ride closed in early 2015. Disney soon replaced it with Luigi's Rollickin' Roadsters, a trackless ride with dancing cars that most guests agree is a major improvement. In the end, Luigi's Flying Tires proved something important. Not everything has to be remade, and when you try to improve upon it, sometimes you end up with something much worse than what inspired it. Number 1. Mogul Mania at Florida's Blizzard Beach. This ride was so bad, it was declared too dangerous to even open to the public. In the mid-1990s, as Blizzard Beach was preparing to open, Disney filmed a segment for the VHS tape Disney Sing-Along Songs Beach Party at Walt Disney World. The tape featured various locations around the resort, including a segment filmed at Blizzard Beach. Would you believe that this seemingly innocuous sing-along tape has perhaps the most dangerous Disney attraction of all time featured in it? In fact, this is the only known footage of the ride in operation. Blizzard Beach is themed as a melting ski resort, so the concept makes sense. Moguls are the bumpy hills that expert skiers weave through on steep slopes. They require balance, control, and are not for beginners whatsoever. So naturally, Disney decided to turn that into a water slide for children. In the footage that's set to the song Hot 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 by Arrow/Buster Poindexter, you can clearly see young riders being bounced aggressively down a series of fiberglass-looking humps. Water sprayers simulate snow machines, keeping the surface slick. It does look creative, but it certainly looks painful too. At one point in the tape, a child visibly wipes out. In another, 3 kids are on the slide at once. One gets stuck in the middle while another comes barreling towards him, nearly kicking him in the head. This could have easily ended in a concussion or worse, and Disney just left it in the VHS tape. Instead of Hot Hot Hot, they should have used this song. Baby, let me take you where the action's hot. Action, action. Mogul Mania never opened to the public. Newspaper reports at the time suggested it was planned as part of the park's lineup, but when Blizzard Beach finally opened in 1995, the slide was not open. It seems the attraction never made it past safety testing. Message board posts from former cast members claimed the slide caused too many injuries during testing. Some say staff had to wear helmets and knee pads while trying it out. If that's true, then it raises an uncomfortable question. Why were these child actors filmed riding it for the VHS without any helmets or pads? Their parents must have signed some serious waivers, and I genuinely wonder how they're doing today. After the concept was scrapped, the area was replaced with the Cool Runners body slides. These standard water slides are relatively unremarkable, but most have no idea they stand on the footprint of something that may have been the most dangerous Disney ride ever. Now for the bonus segment, perhaps the most controversial Disney attraction of all time. Now, I didn't include this on the list because it's a walkthrough exhibit and not actually a ride. Real quick before I go into this though, this segment will involve discussions of eating disorders, so if you don't wish to watch, you're more than welcome to stop the video here. Back when Innoventions was still around Epcot, several exhibits would be open to the public. These exhibits, which focused on technological advancements, have mostly been forgotten over the years. But in 2012, one exhibit became perhaps the most controversial attraction ever installed by Disney. This interactive exhibit, named Habit Heroes, was not technically a ride, but rather a walkthrough attraction involving a series of games. So here was the basic premise. Guests were recruited to become health heroes by two peppy Disney Channel-looking superheroes named Willpower and Calisthenics. The plot involved going head-to-head with a series of villains that represented bad habits and harmful lifestyle choices. There were three main activities, each representing a different quote-unquote habit. First was a scenario that involved excessive screen time. In this game, you took on a character named Control Freak, using colored buttons to zap and destroy a bunch of screens. Afterwards, you took on two villains named the Snacker and Sweet Tooth, who represented eating too much quote-unquote junk food. Your job was to shoot and destroy all of the quote-unquote empty calorie foods you could. Finally, you took on the main villain that represented inactivity and a lack of exercise. His name was, and I'm not joking, Leadbottom. He was portrayed as a cartoonishly oversized figure. Guests were then encouraged to dance along with the characters and use quote-unquote positive peer pressure to encourage Leadbottom to exercise, which would defeat him. From the moment that it opened, this attraction was absolutely slammed by the public. Many pointed out that it perpetuated harmful stereotypes, and instead of encouraging healthy habits, it just shamed people. Experts argued that this could have easily triggered eating disorders. Famous weight management specialist Yoni Friedhoff from the University of Ottawa said the following about the attraction. The exhibit dumbed down childhood obesity to a choice, as if kids, or adults, go to bed at night thinking, hot damn, I'm going to be lazy and gluttonous rather than active and healthy. The attraction got so much heat that Disney closed it after just 2 days, replacing it with an altered version. For this version, they consulted various children's health and obesity experts, which is really something they should have done in the first place. Still, that version didn't last long either, and closed in 2016. Now, I don't usually do this, but I feel like this has to be said. The kind of habits that are represented on this attraction aren't a choice for many people. They're often the result of mental health factors beyond one's control: depression, past traumas, addiction, and more. The absolute worst thing you can do to help someone lose weight is shame them, unintentionally or not. And that's what this attraction did in the eyes of many. Weight management and physical health are important, but improving them cannot involve shame. If you are struggling with an eating disorder, help is available, and I will link resources in the description. Now it's time for the comment shoutout program. This is where I take 5 random comments from my last video and read them out. These comments come from my video on the Jaws ride at night. Melina Meng says, I went on a Jaws ride in Osaka, Japan's Universal Studios for the very first time, and it was amazing. Yuma Hummus 5033 says, 249, Thomas and Friends Minis jump scare. Steel Curtain 187 says, this definitely looks super creepy. Add on top of it, you were the person who fell overboard on this ride that one time, but at night. Legion of Doom 1939 says, my worst nightmare was ever falling into the Jaws ride. My brain was shut off before I touched the water if that ever happened, lol. Love this ride though. And Yogi Jonah 1243 says, you should really consider doing a deep dive of Halloween Horror Nights. It's a goldmine of history and lore. I think that's a pretty good idea.
If you want to see your words in my next video, leave a comment down below and it may be selected. Please note though that inflammatory or spam comments will not be read. Thank you all so much, and if you want to support me on Patreon, you can do so once again at the link in the description. Thanks for watching, everyone. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe. You can follow me on social media on Instagram and Facebook, or you can check out my website at themeparkcrazy.com. And I'm on TikTok. This is Theme Park Crazy, and I'll see you all next time.